The first thing she tasted was the cheap, bitter coffee. It was a world away from the rare Ethiopian blend she had shipped to her private jet. The second thing she tasted was revenge, and it was infinitely sweeter. From the back of the hired town car, she watched him. Julian Blackwood stood on the steps of the new city hall, a building his construction firm had just finished. His dark hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place in the chilly autumn wind. He was smiling that easy, charming smile for the cameras, one arm wrapped around her. Chloe, the woman he'd left her for, the woman he'd framed her for. 5 years. They had taken 5 years of her life. 5 years of cold, gray walls, of being a number, of listening to the clang of steel doors that locked away her freedom. All because Julian needed a scapegoat for his crumbling company. All because he thought his quiet, unassuming wife Lena was too weak to fight back. He had no idea he had sent Lena Blackwood to prison, but he was about to meet Sloane Sterling. Before we dive in, take a moment to drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? I love seeing how far these stories reach across the globe. Hit subscribe now. A new one's coming tomorrow, so don't miss it. Let's continue. Nixton. Her driver, a stoic man named Arthur, who knew more about her than almost anyone, glanced in the rearview mirror. The jet is ready, ma'am. The board is waiting for your call at 3 p.m. sharp. Sloane didn't look away from the window. Her eyes, a sharp, icy green that had once been warm, were fixed on her ex-husband. She wore a simple, severe black coat, her auburn hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. No jewelry, nothing that would draw attention. Not yet. Let them wait, she said, her voice calm. It was a voice that had learned its power in silence, in the quiet observation of a prison yard. A voice that now commanded a global tech empire, Ethelgard Holdings, from the shadows. She watched as Julian kissed Chloe's cheek, the picture of a successful, devoted husband. Rage, hot and sharp, twisted in her gut. She remembered the last time she'd seen him smile like that. It was the day he'd stood in a different courtroom and pointed a finger at her, his voice cracking with fake emotion as he told the jury how his poor, misguided wife had embezzled millions to cover debts from a failed business she'd never started. She had been too shocked to speak then, too broken. She'd trusted him, loved him. She'd signed whatever papers he put in front of her, too blinded by love to see the traps he was laying. Never again, she thought, the words a cold, hard stone in her heart. Never again will anyone have that power over me. On the courthouse steps, Julian's phone rang. He frowned, pulling it from his pocket. His smile vanished. The color drained from his perfectly tanned face. The camera flashes seemed to annoy him now, and he turned away from the reporters, his free hand gesturing wildly. Sloane allowed herself a small, thin smile. That would be the call. The call from his bank, informing him that his multi-million-dollar line of credit had just been called in, immediately. All of it. She had spent the last 3 years, since her early release, for good behavior, a behavior she'd paid a small fortune to fabricate, slowly and quietly acquiring his debt. She'd bought it through shell companies, through foreign holdings, through a web of financial entities so complex even the best accountants would need years to untangle it. She owned the paper on his life. His company, Blackwood Construction, his new mansion, his cars, it was all built on a foundation of sand, and she was the coming tide. "Arthur," she said softly, "let's go." As the car pulled away from the curb, she took one last look at Julian, who was now shouting into his phone, his perfect world cracking apart in public view. This was only the beginning. A single, sharp tug on a thread that would unravel his entire world. But first, she had to go home. A home he didn't know existed. The private jet was a sanctuary of white leather and polished walnut. As it climbed above the clouds, leaving the city and Julian behind, Sloane finally let her shoulders relax a fraction. She walked to the bedroom in the back, locking the door. She shrugged off the cheap black coat, letting it fall to the floor. Underneath, she wore a simple silk t-shirt and trousers. But her hands went to the neckline of the shirt. With a sharp tug, she pulled it away from her skin. underneath, nestled against her sternum, was a thin, silver key on a delicate chain. Her freedom, her power. It was the key to a safe deposit box in Zurich, the one that held the original documents proving her identity as Sloane Sterling, the majority shareholder of Ethelgard. The identity she had hidden from Julian from the very beginning. Her grandmother had been a ruthless, self-made billionaire who taught her one crucial lesson: trust no one, especially the people who claim to love you. She had foolishly ignored that lesson for Julian. She would not ignore it again. She changed into a cashmere sweatsuit, the fabric soft and comforting against her skin. She poured herself a glass of ice water and sat by the window, watching the world shrink below. The anger was still there, a constant, humming engine inside her. But now, it was joined by a flicker of doubt. Is this who I am now? She wondered, tracing a circle of condensation on her glass. A creature of revenge? The woman Julian married, the one who loved painting landscapes and volunteering at the animal shelter, felt like a ghost. That woman had died in a prison cell, crying herself to sleep on a thin, lumpy mattress. She had built Ethelgard from her prison cell, using a secured, monitored laptop that her lawyers paid for by a mysterious benefactor her own Swiss holding company had fought to allow her. She'd coded, she'd designed, she'd emailed with dummy accounts, building a revolutionary new AI logistics software that the world's governments and corporations were now desperate to own. She'd done the impossible. But the cost was her soul. The plane began its descent into New York, not the New York of crowded subways and noisy streets that Julian knew. Her New York was a penthouse atop the tallest tower in Manhattan, a fortress of glass and steel that looked down on everything. Her chief of security, a man named David Chen, was waiting for her on the tarmac. He was the only person, besides Arthur, who had visited her in prison. He was the one who had taken her coded messages and turned them into a global empire. "Sloane," he said with a curt nod, falling into step beside her as a black Rolls-Royce glided up. "The Blackwood situation is progressing. His stock is down 18% since the market got wind of his liquidity crisis. The vultures are circling." "Good," she said, sliding into the car. "Let them pick at the bones. I want the whole skeleton." David got in beside her. He was a man of few words, but his loyalty was absolute. "There's something else. He's desperate. He's called a meeting with a potential investor tomorrow, a last-ditch effort to save his company." Sloane felt a thrill, cold and sharp. "Who?" "A venture capital firm, Titan Ventures." She laughed, a short, dry sound. "I own Titan Ventures." "I know," David said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "He has no idea. The meeting is at 10 a.m. at his office. He's pulling out all the stops." A plan, beautiful and brutal, began to form in her mind. "Cancel my morning. We're going to that meeting." "As yourself?" David asked, surprised. "No," Sloane said, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. "Not as myself. He's expecting a suit from Titan Ventures. He won't be expecting me." The memory hit her that night as she stood on the terrace of her penthouse, the glittering lights of the city spread out at her feet like a conquered kingdom. It was their 3rd anniversary. Julian had cooked her dinner, something he never did. He'd been nervous, jittery. She'd thought it was sweet. "Sit down, my love," he'd said, guiding her to a chair. "I have something to show you." He'd spread the papers out on the table, financial documents, company reports. It looked like gibberish to her. "The company? We're in a bit of a tight spot," he'd admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But it's nothing we can't handle. I just need your help. I need you to sign these. It's just a formality, a loan using our shared assets as collateral. It'll show the board we're a united front." She looked at his pleading, handsome face. This was the man she loved, the man who had saved her from a life of quiet loneliness after her grandmother's death. She'd trusted him completely. "Of course, Julian," she'd said, picking up the pen. "Anything for you." She'd signed. She'd signed every page he put in front of her, not reading, not questioning. she'd signed her life away. The wind whipped at her hair, pulling her back to the present. The warmth of the memory was instantly swallowed by the chilling reality. That night hadn't been about unity. It had been about setting her up. He'd funneled company money into her personal accounts he controlled, and then reported the missing funds himself. The signatures on those documents were her confession. She had been so blind, so stupid. For all her grandmother's lessons, for all her innate genius with code and business, she had been a fool for love. Well, she thought, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the railing, the fool is dead, and the bitch is back. The next morning, she dressed for war. She chose a sharply tailored dove-gray pantsuit from a designer Julian could never afford. Her hair was down, sleek and shiny. She wore minimal makeup, but her eyes were lined and sharp. She looked every inch the billionaire CEO she was, a far cry from the frumpy, heartbroken woman he'd last seen in a prison jumpsuit. She didn't take the rolls. She took a more anonymous car, with David driving. They pulled into the underground garage of Blackwood Construction. Her heart was pounding, a drumbeat of fury and anticipation. She walked through the lobby, a place she'd only ever seen as Julian's doting wife, holding his arm. Now she was a stranger, a powerful one. No one recognized her. They saw a confident, formidable woman, and they parted for her. She didn't stop at the reception desk. She and David walked straight to the bank of elevators leading to the executive floor. As the elevator doors pinged open on the plush carpeted hallway, she saw Julian's assistant, a young man she didn't recognize. "Can I help you?" the assistant asked, looking flustered. "Sloane Sterling," she said, her voice cool and steady. "I'm here for my 10 o'clock with Mr. Blackwood." The assistant's eyes widened. He'd been expecting a stuffy, middle-aged banker, not her. "Of course, Miss Sterling. Right this way. He's just finishing up a call." He led them to the large, oak-paneled doors of Julian's office. The doors were slightly ajar. She could hear his voice, strained and angry. "I don't care what you have to do, just fix it," he was yelling. "Sell the yacht, the art. I don't care. This deal with Titan Ventures has to go through. It's my only chance." The assistant knocked gently and pushed the door open. "Mr. Blackwood, your 10 o'clock is here. Miss Sterling from Titan Ventures." Julian was standing with his back to the door, looking out the window at the city. He turned around, a practiced, desperate smile already plastered on his face. "Miss Sterling, thank you so much for coming on such short," he began. The words died in his throat. His eyes met hers. The smile melted away, replaced by a wave of confusion, then dawning horror. His face went pale. His jaw went slack. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Her ghost. He stared, his brain trying to process the impossible image in front of him. His ex-wife, the one he'd sent to rot in prison, standing in his office, dressed like a queen, looking at him with an expression of pure, icy calm. Sloane took a single step forward, allowing a slow, cold smile to touch her lips. The silence in the room was deafening. "Hello, Julian," she said, her voice soft but carrying like a shard of glass. "Surprised to see me?" The silence in Julian Blackwood's office was so profound, Sloane could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. She watched, a predator, savoring the moment, as the blood drained from Julian's face. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked from her to David Chen, then back to her, his mind visibly short-circuiting. "Elena?" he finally stammered, the name a choked whisper. It was the name of the woman he'd created, the woman he'd broken. "It's Sloane," she corrected, her voice still soft, still deadly. "Sloane Sterling. I believe we have a meeting about your company's financial future." She didn't wait for an invitation. She walked past him, her heels sinking into the plush Persian rug he'd once bragged about buying at auction. She chose the largest leather chair facing his desk and sat, crossing her legs. David remained standing near the door, a silent, imposing sentinel. Julian was still rooted to the spot. This is some kind of joke, a trick. He found his anger, a weak, flailing thing. "You're supposed to be in prison?" Sloane finished for him, arching a single perfectly shaped brow. "I was released. For good behavior. You, of all people, should know how convincing good behavior can be." She let the words hang in the air, a direct reference to the performance he'd given in court. He finally moved, stumbling towards his desk as if it were a lifeline. He collapsed into his high-backed chair, his eyes never leaving her face. "What are you doing here? What do you want?" "I told you. I represent Titan Ventures. We're considering investing in Blackwood construction." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sweeping over the opulent office, the mahogany bookshelves, the abstract art that cost more than a house, the framed photos of him and Chloe on a sailboat. Though, given the current state of your finances, salvaging might be a better word than investing. The mention of his finances jolted him back to reality. The desperate phone call, the called-in loans. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of his old cunning returning. You're behind this. The credit line. That was you." Sloane said nothing. She simply smiled. Rage, hot and sudden, contorted his features.
"You bitch! You think you can walk in here and destroy what I've built? After what you did? After you stole from me?"
The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. It ignited the fury she kept on a tight leash. He still believes his own story, she realized. Or he's just that good of a liar. "We both know what I did, Julian," she said, her voice dropping, losing its cool edge for a moment, becoming raw. "I trusted you, I loved you, and you used that to throw me to the wolves." She gestured around the room. "You built all of this on my back, on my 5 years." "You have no proof of anything," he spat, his fists clenching on the desk. "I don't need proof for a business decision," she countered, her composure returning, ice quenching the fire. "All I need are the numbers. And your numbers are a disaster. Your biggest project, the North Shore development, is over budget and behind schedule. The city is threatening to pull the contract. You have creditors knocking at your door. Titan Ventures is your last hope." She saw the truth of her words hit him like physical blows. He was cornered, and he knew it. The bravado deflated, replaced by a panicked calculation. He needed her money. The money of the woman he'd ruined. "What are your terms?" he asked. The question dragged out of him. Sloane reached into the slim leather portfolio she carried and slid a single sheet of paper across the vast expanse of his desk. "This is a preliminary offer. We'll cover all your immediate debts and fund the North Shore completion. In return, Titan Ventures takes a 51% controlling stake in Blackwood Construction." Julian snatched the paper, his eyes scanning the figures. He looked up, aghast. 51%? This isn't an investment. It's a takeover. You'd own my company." "It would be our company," Sloane corrected smoothly. "And frankly, Julian, without this, you won't have a company by the end of the month. You'll be bankrupt. Your assets, this office, your house, that lovely sailboat, will be seized." She paused, letting the image of his ruined life sink in. "This offer is a lifeline, a rather generous one, considering." He stared at her, true hatred burning in his eyes now. He saw the trap, but he couldn't see a way out. He was desperate. She could see the war inside him, his pride versus his survival instinct. I need to talk to my lawyers. My board," he said weakly. "Of course," Sloane said, rising gracefully from her chair. "You have 24 hours. The offer expires at 10 a.m. tomorrow." She walked to the door, where David stood. She stopped, turning back for one final look. "It was interesting seeing you again, Julian. Prison changes a person. I wonder how bankruptcy will change you." She didn't wait for a response. She and David walked out, leaving Julian Blackwood sitting alone in his crumbling empire, the ghost of his past now holding his future in her hands. The moment the elevator doors closed, the calm mask Sloane wore shattered. She leaned against the wall, her hands trembling. Seeing him, being in that room, breathing the same air, It had taken every ounce of her strength not to scream, not to pick up one of his heavy crystal paperweights and smash it into his lying face. "Are you all right, Sloane?" David asked, his voice low with concern. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "I will be. It was just harder than I thought." The memory of his initial shock was a sweet balm, but the confrontation itself had scraped old wounds raw. He didn't even apologize. A small, wounded part of her whispered. He didn't even look ashamed, just angry and scared. "He'll take the deal," David stated. "He has no other choice." "I know," she said, straightening up as the elevator reached the lobby. The mask was back in place. "But I don't just want him to take the deal. I want him to beg for it." Back in the car, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her head of acquisitions. The subject line made her blood run cold. "Blackwood North Shore Project. Environmental Report. Barry." Her fingers flew across the screen, opening the attached file. As she read, a cold, ruthless satisfaction settled over her. Julian hadn't just been incompetent. He'd been criminal. The report, which he had paid to have buried, showed that the land for his prized North Shore development was contaminated with industrial runoff. Building on it without a massively expensive, time-consuming cleanup was illegal. He'd known. And he'd hidden it, forging permits and environmental waivers. This wasn't just a failing company. This was a ticking time bomb. When it went public, he wouldn't just face bankruptcy. He would face criminal charges, real ones. A new, more devastating plan began to form. She wouldn't just take his company. She would make him destroy himself with it. That evening, as she reviewed the damning report in her study, an unexpected call came through her private line. The number made her freeze. It was Chloe's mother, Eleanor, a kind, older woman who had always been nice to her when she was Lena, a woman who had no idea what her son-in-law had done. Curiosity warring with caution, Sloane answered. "Eleanor?" "Lena? Oh, my dear, is it really you?" Eleanor's voice was warm but strained. "I heard from a friend they saw you released. I'm so glad you're out. I never believed it, you know. What they said you did." Sloane's throat tightened. This small, unexpected kindness was somehow more painful than Julian's hatred. "Thank you, Eleanor. That means a lot." There was a pause. I'm calling because I'm worried about Chloe." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Julian, he's not the man we thought he was. The money is gone. He's become so angry. The way he talks to her, I'm scared for her. I know it's not your problem, but I didn't know who else to talk to." Sloane sat back, stunned. Chloe, the other woman, the one she'd blamed, hated. But was she just another one of Julian's victims? Another woman being lied to and used? A sliver of doubt pierced her heart of revenge. Did Chloe know the truth about the embezzlement? Was she complicit? Or was she living in the same beautiful, gilded cage Sloane had once inhabited? I'm sorry to hear that, Eleanor," Sloane said carefully. "I can't get involved, but tell Chloe to be careful." She ended the call, her mind reeling. The game had just become more complicated. She had the weapon to destroy Julian, but using it could also destroy an innocent woman caught in the crossfire. She looked at the environmental report on her screen, then out at the glittering city. She had the power to crush him. But now, a new question haunted her. How much collateral damage am I willing to cause? The phone trembled in her hand as she made her next decision. She would meet Chloe. She had to look her in the eye and see if she was a villain or a victim. She typed a message to a private investigator. "Find out everything you can about Chloe Blackwood, her finances, her friends, her state of mind. I need to know if she knew." The reply was almost instant. "Already on it. One more thing you should know. She's pregnant." Sloane dropped the phone. It clattered onto the marble floor. Pregnant. Julian was going to be a father. He was building a new family on the ashes of the one he'd destroyed. And she was standing in the ruins, ready to burn it all down. The ghost in his office was now a specter at his door, and she held a secret that could shatter his world in an entirely new way. But as she looked at the cracked screen of her phone, Sloane Sterling wasn't sure if she was holding a weapon or a curse. News of Chloe's pregnancy echoed in the silent, vast space of Sloane's penthouse. It was a variable she had not anticipated, a human complication in her clean, mathematical plan of revenge. A baby. An innocent life, soon to be entangled in the wreckage she was so carefully orchestrating. For a long time, she just stood there, the damning environmental report forgotten on her screen. The image of Julian, smiling with his hand on Chloe's flat stomach for the cameras, flashed in her mind. It was the future he had stolen from her, the future she was now poised to poison. "He doesn't deserve it," the angry, scarred part of her screamed. "He doesn't deserve any of it." But the part of her that remembered reading storybooks to imaginary children in her prison cell, the part that still ached with a hollow, maternal grief, whispered a treacherous thought. "Does the baby?" Shaking her head, she pushed the sentiment aside. Sentiment was what had landed her in prison. Sentiment was a weakness Julian had exploited. She couldn't afford it now. She had to know what Chloe knew. The private investigator's full report arrived an hour later. Sloane pored over it, looking for the truth in the dry lines of text. Chloe came from old, modest money, now mostly gone. She was a former art gallery assistant, 28 years old, to Julian's 40. The financial analysis was clear. Julian controlled everything. Her accounts were generous allowances. Her credit cards were all under his name. She was, financially, a pampered prisoner. There were photos, too. Chloe leaving a high-end prenatal yoga class, her face drawn and tired. Chloe sitting alone in a cafe, staring out the window, not touching her tea. She didn't look like a triumphant homewrecker. She looked lonely. She looked scared. Eleanor's words came back to her. "I'm scared for her." A plan, dangerous and unorthodox, took shape. She couldn't confront Julian again, not yet. The power play in his office had been necessary, but this required a subtler touch. She needed to see the enemy's camp from the inside. She needed to see Chloe. The opportunity came sooner than expected. David informed her that Julian, in a desperate attempt to project normalcy and success, was throwing a lavish, groundbreaking gala for the North Shore development in 2 days. It was the perfect theater. "I need an invitation," Sloane said. David didn't question it. "It will be done." The night of the gala, Sloane dressed not as a corporate raider, but as a ghost. She chose a gown of liquid silver, a color that shimmered and changed in the light, reminiscent of handcuffs. It was stark, severe, and breathtakingly expensive. She wore her grandmother's diamonds at her ears and throat, not for their beauty, but for their weight, a reminder of the legacy of strength she had once forsaken. She looked like a queen, returning to a kingdom that had forgotten her, which was precisely the point. The gala was held at the Museum of Modern Art, a space Julian had rented to impress the city's elite. As Sloane glided through the crowd on David's arm, a hush fell in her wake. Whispers rippled through the room. People recognized her, or thought they did. They saw the woman from Julian's past, but transformed, radiant with a cold, formidable power. They saw the CEO of Titan Ventures, the woman who held Julian's fate in her hands. The combination was electrifying. She saw Julian across the room, frozen mid-conversation, a champagne flute dangling from his fingers. His face was a mask of pure panic. Chloe stood beside him, beautiful in a soft pink gown, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She followed Julian's horrified gaze and saw Sloane. Confusion, then dawning recognition, then fear flickered across her delicate features. Good, Sloane thought. Let them both be afraid. She didn't approach them. Instead, she moved through the room, a shark circling its prey. She greeted people she knew, smiled at those who stared, all the while keeping Julian and Chloe in her peripheral vision. She could feel the tension radiating from them. An hour into the evening, she found her moment. Chloe had broken away from Julian, heading towards the restroom, looking pale and unsteady. Sloane gave her a minute, then followed. The women's lounge was an oasis of calm marble and soft lighting. Chloe was standing at one of the sinks, gripping the porcelain basin, her head bowed. She looked up as Sloane entered, and her eyes widened in terror. "Please," Chloe whispered, taking a step back. "Don't." Sloane stopped, leaning against the doorframe, blocking the exit. She said nothing, just studied the younger woman. The fear in her eyes was real. It wasn't the fear of a guilty person caught, but the fear of a cornered animal. "He told me you were unstable," Chloe blurted out, her voice trembling. "He said you were obsessed with him, that you were here to hurt us." "And you believe him?" Sloane asked, her voice quiet and even. "I don't know what to believe anymore." The words burst out of her, choked with emotion. "The money is gone. He's angry all the time. He says it's the stress of the business. But he's different. The man I married, he's just gone." Sloane saw her opening. A tiny, hairline crack in the perfect facade of Julian's life. She took a careful step forward. "The man you married," Sloane repeated softly. "Did he tell you he loved baking sourdough on Sundays? That he was terrified of bees? That he cried at the end of that old space movie every single time?" Chloe stared, her breath catching. She gave a tiny, helpless nod. "That man was a performance, Chloe," Sloane said, the words like drops of acid. "He performs whatever role he needs to get what he wants. For me, it was the doting husband who needed my help with some papers. For you, it's the successful businessman providing a beautiful life." She paused, letting the implication hang in the scented air. "What papers has he asked you to sign lately?" Chloe's hand flew unconsciously to her stomach. The gesture was all the answer Sloane needed. The crack widened. He said it was for the baby's trust fund, to protect our assets," she murmured, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Sloane felt a cold certainty settle over her. He was doing it again. The same playbook. He was probably moving debt into Chloe's name, using her and the baby as a human shield against his creditors. "He sent me to prison for 5 years for embezzling money I never touched," Sloane said, her voice hardening. "He framed me to save his company, and now his company is failing again, and he has a new wife, a new signature." The truth, spoken so bluntly, was too much for Chloe. A single tear escaped, tracing a path through her perfect makeup. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, as if it were a confession. "I know," Sloane said, and in that moment, any remaining hatred she had for this woman evaporated, replaced by a grim, furious pity. Chloe wasn't the other woman. She was the next victim. Before Sloane could say more, the lounge door swung open. Julian stood there, his face a thundercloud of rage. He looked from Chloe's tear-streaked face to Sloane's calm, triumphant one. "Get away from my wife!" he snarled, stepping between them. Sloane didn't flinch. She met his gaze, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. "We were just having a chat about family, Julian. About trust. About all the things you so easily break." He grabbed Chloe's arm, his grip visibly tight. "We're leaving." As he pulled a stunned Chloe from the room, he turned back for a final venomous look at Sloane. "You'll regret this. I'll destroy you." The door swung shut, leaving Sloane alone in the sudden quiet. The confrontation had been a success. She had planted the seed of doubt in Chloe's mind. She had seen the true, ugly face of Julian's desperation. But as she looked at her own reflection in the mirror, a powerful, avenging angel in a gown of silver, the victory felt hollow. She had looked into the eyes of a scared, pregnant woman and seen her own past reflection. She had confirmed that Chloe was just another pawn in Julian's game. The path to revenge was now clear, but it was also stained with the tears of an innocent. She had the environmental report. She had Chloe's growing doubt. She had Julian backed into a corner. It was time to spring the trap. But as she left the restroom, returning to the noise and glitter of the gala, one thought echoed in her mind, a thought that filled her with a new kind of dread. When the cage door springs shut, who else will be caught inside? The gala was a disaster for Julian Blackwood, and Sloane watched the fallout in real time from her command center, the back of her Rolls-Royce. Live feeds from inside the museum showed a shaken, ashen-faced Julian trying to salvage the evening, but the whispers were now a roar. The story wasn't about his new development. It was about the ghost of his past, the formidable Sloane Sterling, and the public meltdown of his new wife. David, monitoring communications from the front seat, turned to her. "He's just called an emergency board meeting for 8 a.m. tomorrow. He's going to tell them he's accepting the Titan Ventures offer." Sloane felt no surge of triumph, only the cold, steady hum of the engine and her own resolve. The offer was no longer the point. It was just the bait. "Good," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Make sure the press is there. I want cameras at the Blackwood building tomorrow morning." "You're going public with the takeover?" "Not the takeover," Sloane corrected, her eyes fixed on the city lights. "The collapse." Back in her penthouse, the quiet felt different. It was no longer a sanctuary, but a war room. The damning environmental report glowed on her screen, a weapon of mass destruction. But the memory of Chloe's terrified, tear-streaked face was a persistent, complicating shadow. She had to move fast. Before Julian could sign anything, before he could spin the narrative, she had to bring the entire corrupt structure down on his head, and she had to give Chloe a chance to get out. It was a risk, a huge one. If Chloe was still loyal to Julian, she would tell him everything, and he would find a way to deflect, to hide, to run. But the raw fear in Chloe's eyes, that had been real. Taking a deep breath, Sloane picked up a burner phone. She typed a message to the number her PI had provided for Chloe, a number Julian wouldn't monitor. "This is Sloane. You are in danger. The North Shore land is contaminated. Julian hid the reports. When this becomes public, he will be charged with fraud. He may be using your name on documents. Check your personal safe. Look for a file with a red tab. Do not tell him. Do not sign anything. There is a car waiting for you at the corner of Elm and 5th if you need it. It will take you to your mother." She hit send. The die was cast. The next morning, the financial world held its breath. News vans were clustered outside the sleek Blackwood construction tower. The story was everywhere. Fallen tycoon to be saved by rival. From prison to power. The Sloane Sterling story. Inside his boardroom, Julian was putting on a brave face. He stood at the head of the table, the same table where he'd once plotted Sloane's downfall. "Gentlemen," he began, forcing confidence into his voice, "I know the last 24 hours have been turbulent, but I have secured a lifeline. A generous offer from Titan Ventures that will not only clear our debts, but see the North Shore project through to completion." He slid copies of Sloane's term sheet across the table. The board members, a collection of weary, nervous men, picked them up. The mood was grim, but there was a palpable sense of relief. They saw the numbers. They knew they had no choice. "It's a takeover, Julian," one of them muttered. "It's survival," Julian snapped, his composure cracking. "Without this, we're finished. Now I need you to—" The boardroom door burst open. His executive assistant stood there, her face pale. "Mr. Blackwood, the press, they—" On the large screen mounted on the wall, tuned to a financial news network, the banner headline changed. "Breaking. Blackwood North Shore site deemed environmental hazard. Forged permits alleged." Julian's world stopped. The air left his lungs. He watched, paralyzed, as a news anchor solemnly detailed the buried environmental report, the forged documents, the massive, intentional fraud. They had copies. They had everything. "How?" he whispered. Then, the camera feed cut to the lobby of his own building. And there she was, Sloane Sterling, surrounded by reporters, a picture of cool, ruthless justice. "A takeover was never my intention," Sloane said, her voice clear and firm through the speakers. "My intention was to expose the truth. Julian Blackwood is not just a failing businessman. He is a criminal who knowingly endangered public health and deceived this city for profit. The offer from Titan Ventures is hereby withdrawn." In the boardroom, chaos erupted. Board members were on their feet, shouting, throwing the term sheets back at Julian. His phone started ringing. Over and over, lawyers, the city, the SEC. It was over. In a single, devastating moment, she had taken everything. His company, his reputation, his future. He was staring at financial ruin and prison. But the final, most personal blow was yet to come. His phone buzzed with a different tone. A notification from his home security system. He pulled it out, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. It was a notification for the personal safe in his study. Safe, door left open. And then, a text from Chloe. A simple, devastating sentence. I know what you did to her. I know what you were going to do to me. I took the file. I'm gone. Julian Blackwood didn't hear the board members resigning. He didn't hear the reporters storming the hallway. He stood alone in the center of the crumbling empire he had built on lies, the screens flashing his ruin, the ghost of his past having finally, completely obliterated his future. He had lost it all. His company, his wife, his freedom. He had nothing. And standing in the lobby below, surrounded by the flashing lights of her victory, Sloane Sterling finally allowed herself to feel it. Not joy, not happiness, but a profound, echoing silence. The debt had been paid. The score had been settled. The revenge was complete. Julian Blackwood had lost everything. But as she turned to walk away, a single, unsettling thought whispered through the silence. Now what? 6 months later, the world had moved on. Julian Blackwood's trial was a media spectacle that ended with a swift and brutal conviction. Sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary, he was led away in handcuffs, a fallen king. His assets were liquidated, his company dissolved. The name Blackwood became synonymous with corruption. Sloane Sterling was hailed as a hero, a victim who had become a victor, a symbol of resilience and ruthless justice. Valkyrie Industries, the parent company of Ethelgard, saw its stock soar. She was on the cover of magazines, celebrated in boardrooms, feared by her rivals. She stood on the terrace of her penthouse, the same spot where she had once plotted his downfall. The city glittered, a kingdom she now unquestionably ruled. She had everything she thought she wanted. The power, the safety, the vindication. So why did it feel so hollow? The silence in her life was deafening. It was the silence of a battle ended, with no one left to fight. The humming engine of rage that had fueled her for years was gone, and in its place was a vast, empty quiet. She had built an empire from a prison cell, but she had no one to share it with. The friends from her old life were gone, wary of the formidable, changed woman she had become. Her world was populated by employees, by sycophants, by people who saw the billionaire CEO, not the woman who had once loved to paint. She thought of Chloe often. Chloe had taken the escape route Sloane provided. She was living with her mother, had given birth to a healthy baby girl, and had filed for divorce. The file she took from Julian's safe had protected her, proving he had attempted to move assets into her name without her full knowledge. She was free. Sloane had received a single, simple email from her months ago. Thank you for everything. I'm sorry. Sloane had never replied. What was there to say? One afternoon, a thick, official-looking envelope arrived at her office, bypassing her assistants. It was hand-delivered. The return address was a federal prison. It was a letter from Julian. Her first instinct was to burn it, unread, to let the past stay buried. But curiosity and a lingering, sick fascination won out. She sliced it open with a silver letter opener. His handwriting was jagged, desperate. Sloane, I have nothing left to lose by writing this. They've put me in a cage. You won. I hope you're happy up there in your glass tower, looking down on all of us. I think about it all the time. The look on your face in the courtroom. The look on your face in my office. I was so blind. I thought I was the smartest person in the room. I thought I had everyone fooled. But you were always playing a different game, weren't you? I was a fool, a greedy, Arrogant fool. I see that now. I lost everything because of it. My company, my freedom, Chloe, my daughter. But you lost something too, didn't you? The woman you were before you met me? The one who painted, the one who laughed. I destroyed her, just as surely as you destroyed me. You became me. Cold, calculating, willing to burn everything to the ground to win. So tell me, Sloane, was it worth it? Are the ashes of my life a comfortable bed? We're both in prisons of our own making now. The only difference is, mine has bars. Julian. Sloane let the letter fall onto her desk. The words were meant to be a final, poisonous dart, but they didn't land with the sting he intended. Instead, they echoed in the hollow space inside her, giving voice to the emptiness she had been feeling for months. You became me. Had she? In her quest for justice, had she shed her own humanity? She had used Chloe as a pawn, however kindly. She had orchestrated a man's total destruction with cold, clinical precision. She had enjoyed it. She walked to the window, placing her palm against the cool, unbreakable glass. She had all the power in the world, but she was utterly alone behind it. Julian was wrong. Her prison didn't have bars. It was made of money and power and silence, and it was infinitely more gilded and more lonely. The revenge was complete. Julian had lost everything. But as Sloane Sterling stared at her reflection in the glass, a powerful, beautiful, lonely ghost, she finally understood the true cost of her victory. She had won it all, and in doing so, she had lost the very thing she had been fighting to get back, herself. The story of her life was no longer about building a future, but about avenging a past. And now that the past was settled, what was left?